All right, let's dive right in. We're breaking down Chapter 7 of the Economic Survey, all about India's industrial sector. And if you're prepping for exams, you're in the right place. We're going to cover the key facts, the must-know concepts, and the analysis that you absolutely need to have down. So let's start with the big framing question for this entire discussion. With everything shifting around the world, geopolitics, supply chains getting a major rethink, what's India's actual potential to become the world's next manufacturing powerhouse? Is it a real possibility? Okay, to put this in perspective, just look at the sheer scale of the opportunity here. India's share of global manufacturing value added, that's MVA, is about 2.8%. Now look at China, almost 29%. For your exam, here's the key takeaway. This massive gap isn't just a challenge, it's a huge runway for growth.
All right, so how are we going to tackle this? Well, to get a really solid grip on the topic, we've broken it down into these 5 key areas. This structure should give you a nice, clear, and logical overview of the whole chapter.
First up, let's put a spotlight on some key industries. We're going to see how major sectors from electronics all the way to textiles are actually doing on the ground.
And wow, check this out. This is a brilliant illustration of a massive policy success story. Look at that transformation. Back in fiscal year 15, 78% of our mobile phones were imported. Fast forward to fiscal year 23, and that number has plummeted to just 4%. This is a direct result of policies like the Production-Linked Incentive Scheme. That's PLI, a crucial concept to remember. It has literally turned India from a net importer into a major manufacturer of electronics.
Sometimes one number can tell the whole story. A massive 68% of all steel we use is gobbled up by just 2 sectors, construction and infrastructure. This really shows you how tightly our steel demand is linked to the government's big push on capital expenditure. It's become a key indicator of our overall economic activity.
Okay, now for the textile sector. For your exams, here's a really easy mnemonic to remember its main challenges. Just think SSS. The first S is for scale. The sector is dominated by small players, which limits efficiency. The second S is for skills. There's a big skill gap that holds back productivity. And the third S is for synthetics. India is still super reliant on cotton, even as the global market has moved decisively towards man-made fibers, or MMF. So remember, SSS, scale, skills, synthetics.
Excellent. Now, let's shift gears and look at what is basically the engine room of any modern industry, innovation and R&D. So, how's India really doing here?
So, on the surface, the story here is actually pretty great. India's ecosystem for intellectual property rights, that's IPR, is really flourishing. Patent grants are up over 17 times since 2015. Our rank in the Global Innovation Index has jumped from 81st to 39th, and this is really crucial. Patent filings by Indian residents now make up more than half of the total. That's a huge shift.
But, and this is a big but, behind all these impressive numbers, there's a nagging question. Are we actually investing enough in the fundamental research that creates these new technologies in the first place?
And to answer that, you need to know this term. It's a super important one for your exams. GERD. It stands for Gross Expenditure on Research and Development. It's basically a simple ratio, the total R&D spending in the country as a percentage of its GDP. It's the key metric for measuring a nation's commitment to innovation. And here's the reality check. While our patent filings are soaring, our actual investment is lagging. India's GERD is just 0.64% of GDP. Now compare that to China at over 2% and South Korea, which is way up there at over 4.5%. This really highlights a major gap in our innovation pipeline.
So if we're not spending enough, the next question is, who is spending the money? And you can see a heavy reliance on the government, which accounts for over 56% of R&D funding. This is the complete opposite of what you see in developed nations like the US or China, where the private sector drives over 70% of the spending. The survey points this out as a key structural issue for us.
All right, let's move on to a sector that is truly the backbone of our economy. It's the second largest employer after agriculture, the micro, small, and medium enterprises, or MSMEs. Just take a moment and look at that number, 23.24 crore people. This figure is just staggering. It's from the Udyam portal, and it really underscores why the health, the growth, and the formalization of the MSME sector are absolutely critical for India's economy and our social stability. Now, one of the biggest headaches for any small business, right? Getting paid on time. Delayed payments can cripple their cash flow.
So, to tackle this, the government introduced TREADS. This is another key term for your exam. TREADS is basically an online platform where MSMEs can auction their unpaid invoices to banks and get their cash quickly. It's a real game-changing reform for their working capital.
Okay, so far we've been looking at India with a 30,000-foot view. But now, let's zoom in a bit. Industry doesn't grow the same everywhere. So let's see how industrialization actually varies across different states. Because in India, all growth is ultimately local.
Now, this table simplifies a pretty complex chart from the survey, and it reveals a fascinating insight. You've got states like Jharkhand and Odisha that are highly dependent on industry, but they generate low per capita industrial income. And then, in contrast, you have states like Maharashtra with a lower relative dependence but high income. So the key takeaway here, being highly dependent on industry doesn't automatically mean higher income for the people.
And this really hammers home the point that what happens in the state capitals matters a lot. As this IMF study points out, state-level business reforms, their regulations, and the infrastructure they build are not just optional extras. They're an absolute necessity for industrial progress.
And this chart just makes it crystal clear. There's a really strong positive correlation here. States that are ranked as top achievers in the Business Reform Action Plan, that's BRAP, consistently show higher industrial output per person compared to the aspirers. It's simple. A better business environment leads to better industrial performance.
Finally, let's bring it all together. For everyone preparing for exams, think of this as your high-density cheat sheet. We've distilled the entire chapter down to the most critical facts, concepts, and data points you need for your final revision.
All right, deep breath. Let's lock in these essentials. First, the key data points. Remember that 2.8% MVA share, the 0.64% JIRD, and the 23.24 crore MSME jobs. Next, master the key acronyms, PLI, GERD, TREADS, and BRAP. And finally, understand the big picture narrative. The core challenges are boosting private R&D, formalizing our MSMEs, and pushing state-level reforms. The only way forward is through coordinated action.
So I'll leave you with this thought. The opportunity for India, especially as global supply chains are shifting, is clearer than it has ever been. But as the economic survey really emphasizes, actually realizing this potential is going to depend entirely on consistent, deep-rooted, and coordinated execution of reforms at every single level. The ambition is there, now it's all about the action.